your bi-weekly dose of Louisville basketball therapy. We're back for the Starting 502 podcast. As always, Presley Meyer, your host for the most. Jake Hook back with us for a second consecutive week, as promised. Jake, how are we doing today, man?
We're good. I'm posted up, got some honey wine in hand.
Okay,
Never
so
never had that before.
what is honey wine? Like, is it actually made from honey or?
I think it just has a little bit of honey in it. It's from some winery called Arrington in Nashville. My girlfriend got it and I was skeptical, but it's delicious.
They make just like it sounds kind of like a wine version of mead. Isn't
Okay, yeah.
mead made from honey? Is that
Yeah, it's
right?
made from honey ferments the fruit and all that stuff. Yeah.
Is it
I don't
like a
know what
mead?
their process is
Yeah.
there, but whatever they're doing, they need to keep it up.
All right. Fair enough. Are you a big wine person, or is it just like
A weekday wine drinker, and then weekends we go up to the big boy stuff, but weekdays for sure wine.
that's fair? Like, I feel like, and not to get too like in the weeds here, but I feel like wine just gives me such a headache. Like, I'm a big bourbon guy just because, like, I know bourbon is so predictable. Like, you know what you're getting with bourbon. There's different tastes, there's different ways that it can hit your palate, but pretty much the same effect no matter what. With wine, it can be like a real crapshoot. Like, there can be some like real cruddy wines and some really good ones. Price point doesn't really matter with wine. Like, it's so weird to me. Like, I stick to my bourbons and light beers, and I think that's just like my range. I think that's just like the normal, like middle-aged male range.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a Wednesday night, so I'm not going too crazy, but about half bottle, full bottle, and I'm good. But anything over that, and I'm waking up and just absolutely hating myself.
That means you're washed now, bro. Congratulations. Welcome to
I've
the club.
I've been washed for 5 years.
Like, give yourself a little credit, man. Come on. Come on. But no, we're here. You guys are here to hear about some Louisville basketball. And at this point, as I kind of stated already, it's kind of like a just a check-in, right? It's just your dose of Louisville basketball therapy is all it is. We should honestly become a call-in show and just let people call in and just vent about the state of Louisville basketball. Like, it's just, I don't know. Like, I think Kenny has truly done it. Like, and maybe props to U of L too. Like, we are to the point now where it's almost like they are almost getting fans to a point where they'll just be content with 15 wins. And that's never what Louisville basketball should be. Making the tournament is just an expectation. Making the Sweet 16 is expected. You know, making the Final Four is the goal. It feels like we're so far away from that. You never know. Like, teams could come out the gate and surprise you. If you want to spin it in any sort of positive way, there truly could have just been just something just very sinister with last year's team. That's pretty much the only the only positive spin anybody has in their arsenal. Like, the coaching staff just like gave up because they were just like, this team's a wreck.
Before we go any further, as you probably know, sports betting is officially live in Kentucky. Sports betting sites are offering new bettors tons of awesome bonuses to get started, and we've made it super easy and put all of our favorite promos into one list for you. Check out all of our best sportsbook promos at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/state of Louisville, so you can maximize your first bets. Also, each time you sign up for one of our promotions, you're directly supporting our podcast. So if you're looking to sign up for the new Kentucky Sportsbooks, head over to bit.ly. Again, that's bit.ly/state of Louisville for our top offers. That's bit.ly/state of Louisville. Offers are only available for new customers who are 18 plus or 21 plus at select sportsbooks and physically present in Kentucky. Please gamble responsibly. And as always, if you have a loved one who has a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER.
We have Louisville basketball's full schedule. Reports that came out, if you listen to our last podcast, were absolutely correct in regards to who Louisville's playing in the non-conference. A nice, cushy non-conference schedule. They start off with what we did not know previously was who they're playing in scrimmages. They're playing Simmons College and Kentucky Wesleyan. Make of that what you will, but I think those teams are even worse than the teams that they played last year in exhibitions. You open the season at the KFC Yum Center with three straight, just as you did last year. UMBC, Chattanooga, Coppin State, and then you head up to Madison Square Garden. You play against Texas, a great Texas squad, to be honest. And then you play probably the loser of UConn or Indiana, if we had to guess. Like I would find it hard to believe that Louisville's going to beat Texas. You never know, but that would be a massive. I mean, imagine, Louisville's playing. I'm not sure they're playing November 18th. I'd have to look it up, but that weekend of football and basketball, Louisville winning a football game of significance. I think they play. Is that the Miami game? I think that's Miami.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Play.
think. I know Virginia Tech is November 4th. Duke is the weekend before that. I can't remember after those 2 weeks though. But the off seasons, that's where you dream. So go ahead and dream, Presley.
Absolutely. November 18th, they do play at Miami, the
Okay.
football team. I will be there in attendance. Then I'll be heading back to the crib in Florida, watching that 3:30 p.m. game against Texas in Madison Square Garden. And then they'll play at some point on Monday. I'm assuming probably they have like a 7 and 9:30 in Madison Square Garden. Into the non-conference grind of New Mexico State on November 26th on a Sunday. Bellarmine on November 29th at the KFC Yum Center. We'd speculated that might be at Bellarmine, but it is in fact in the Yum Center. And then you get a little conference flavor, and that's something we didn't really get into. You have that big break between November 29th and December 9th when they travel to DePaul. After Bellarmine, they traveled to Virginia Tech on December 3rd, and then they traveled to DePaul. So that's a little wrinkle in the schedule. Virginia Tech has been fielding some pretty solid last couple of years. And then rounding out the non-conference, you have Arkansas State and Pepperdine at home before hosting Kentucky December 21st, the Thursday before Christmas. So before you kind of move past that non-conference, we'll get into that in the future, but any thoughts on how the non-conference schedule panned out? And
I mean, I can't give this coaching staff a lot of credit just yet based on what we saw last year, but I think they did do a really great job of building out this non-conference schedule because after only winning 4 games last season, if we front-loaded this schedule and just got destroyed and we're under 500 by the time we're going into conference play, I mean, morale is going to be so down, fan support's going to be so down. So I think the staff did a really good job of setting themselves up to be 9-3, 8-4 at the end of this with a couple challenging games, Texas, IU, or UConn, Virginia Tech, UK. So we'll get to see kind of what this team is by the end of the non-con, but we've also got a lot of really winnable games that I think are super important for team morale, fan support, and just keeping this coaching staff alive.
it's crucial that this team has a winning record in the non-conference. Like it will be like it's already like DEFCON 4 or something.
Which
I don't
way
know.
is it? Is it the bigger the number or is it the lower? I think it's the lower the number, the more serious the threat. Is that
I
right?
think so. That sounds right. But whatever the DEFCON is, it's like it's nearing close to not good. And then they don't have another conference game until January 3rd. So that's nice in a sense compared to last year where they played, I believe, 3 conference games before they rounded out the non-conference schedule. So there's a blend. But just quickly looking over the schedule, you have after at Virginia Tech, you have at Virginia, then you host Pitt at home, then travel to Miami, NC State at home, then travel to North Carolina, travel to Wake Forest after that. So I wonder if they'll just go to North Carolina and just stay there because they have North Carolina January 17th and then Wake Forest on January 20th. Then you get Duke at home, Virginia at home, at Clemson, then Florida State at home, at Syracuse, Georgia Tech at home, at Boston College, at Pitt, Notre Dame home, Duke on the road, Syracuse at home again, Virginia Tech at home, and then you round out the schedule with Boston College at home. That's a lot to kind of process there, but quick initial thoughts on the conference schedule.
Hate having to go to Virginia for the very, well, not the very first, but I guess the second conference game. That's going to be a battle, but then it kind of eases up. You go Pitt at home, but then back on the road at Miami. So I mean, I think the beginning of the schedule is actually kind of tough at Virginia, at Miami, at North Carolina, at Wake Forest, all in the first 6 games. And then you go home, Duke, Virginia. Starts to ease up there towards the middle end, though. So hopefully this team can hit its stride toward the end, playing at Boston College, at Pitt, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Boston College again to round out the end of your schedule. It's definitely the way I'd like to end my schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of mentioned this to you in casual conversation, Jake, but the first thing that really stands out to me, number one, no ACC SEC challenge. We kind of already knew that. Louisville was the odd man out because they technically came in last in the conference last season. The positive that you get from not being one of the top, they're typically considered a top 5 or 6 team in the conference year in, year out. Going back to the Bettino days, early Chris Mack days, they're considered a top 3 team in the conference, right? And then you get schedules like you had last year, where Miami and Clemson were excellent teams last year. Virginia is always a good team, and here's how they finished the season: at Miami, Virginia at home, Clemson at home, at Duke, at Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, at Virginia. That's a brutal finish to a schedule. Whereas this year, you finish off the schedule, you host Boston College on senior day. For it seems like since they started in the ACC, they've hosted Virginia every other year on senior day. And if it's not Virginia, it's Virginia Tech or it's Miami, or it's like a high level squad to host. Boston College isn't by any means, nobody's a gimme game. But Boston College isn't by any means a super difficult opponent, right? You get them at 5:30 on a Saturday for senior day. Have Notre Dame at home. You travel to Duke, and then you get Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Boston College all at home. Syracuse, not quite the program that they were just a few years ago. Virginia Tech, solid, but at least you get them at home. And then you again, Boston College in the season, a little bit easier stretch. And as you already indicated, you don't have these like murderous stretches, right? Like you don't have these stretches where you play at North Carolina on a Saturday night at 9 o'clock for college game day or something, and then come back home and host Duke on a Monday. Louisville had a lot of those in previous iterations of schedules. This year, you travel to Virginia on January 3rd, but then you get Pitt at home. So like Pitt, kind of middle to bottom tier of the conference typically. Then you travel to Miami, but then you get NC State at home. Then you travel to North Carolina, but then you get Wake Forest too, is a toss up year in and year out. You got Duke at home, Virginia at home. So, those are 2 good back-to-back opponents, but both at home. There's things like that I look at on the schedule. Again, the ACC slate will never be quote unquote easy, but at least you have time to prepare. At least it doesn't feel like this daunting murderous stretch. Whereas if you look at like a Duke schedule or a North Carolina schedule, it seems like they're always backloaded. So what they like to do is get these teams, where they're like really rolling. And you get, say it's Duke, North Carolina, and Miami this year, kind of battle it out towards the end of February, early March. But all of a sudden you have Duke, North Carolina, Miami, and say it's, this year's, 4th team is like Virginia Tech, right? And you have those teams all playing each other, having a, kind of battling it out. That's typically how they want it to work, right? They want these big pre-conference tournament games to be big time matchups, right? And that's not necessarily something that Louisville has to deal with. So, in my opinion, if there are benefits of being one of the worst teams in the ACC last year, it's that you at least get a little bit of a reprieve schedule wise. I mean, do you agree with that notion?
Yeah, I mean, especially to end the season, like you said, because they always want to front load that schedule for the top dogs, make it a little easier. So you've got North Carolina, Duke, Virginia sitting at 7-1 halfway through the conference. And then towards the end, you've got all your top dogs that have a great conference record playing against each other. So it makes it interesting. You've got more top 25 matchups at the end. The thing I noticed also for the cable dogs like myself, we've got 8 ESPN games. So that's 8 games I won't have to illegally stream.
There you go.
And then we've also got 4 for the first time ever CW games. Excited to see what that looks like. Not holding out too high of hopes, but I think you said earlier it's going to be like the Raycom games where the broadcasters probably aren't that great, probably don't even know how to pronounce everybody's names. But hey, it's Louisville basketball on cable television, so I'll take it.
Absolutely. I was about to say, especially for the old school guys who haven't cut the cord yet, this is a great schedule for you this year. It's funny, you look at some of the high teams now, and it's like right? Those guys are going to a lot of streaming games because they're trying to push people towards streaming. And now you're seeing Louisville a lot more on national TV, which is funny. Yeah, as you indicated, 8 games on the ESPN networks. You also have some, ACC networks in there. So yeah, kind of a fascinating case study on what happens when you suck that bad. We could come back to say later on, like, wow, we did not expect Pitt to be that good this year. Like, we did not expect NC State to be that good. It's just kind of interesting to just see how that tends to work out, right? There are, if there are any benefits to sucking, those are 2 benefits. Number one, you get a lot more on cable television. And number 2, the schedule is not quite as daunting. I really keep looking at, this non-conference schedule to tell us what kind of potential that Louisville can have. Obviously, it's just like Louisville football this year, right? Like, yeah, you played 3 Power 5 teams in your first 4 games. That's great. But the 3 Power 5 teams were Georgia Tech, Indiana, and Boston College. Like, that's a little different than playing 80% of the other Power 5 teams, right? So, it's still, in a sense, you're still in wait and see mode. Same with this non-conference, right? Like, UMBC, they have some name power because they made that big run in the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago, and they're not the Sister Jean one. That's Loyola. I'm sorry, but UMBC is the big Twitter. They have the great Twitter mod. If
Yeah.
you ever follow UMBC, they love the trash talk. But then Chattanooga, seems like a game that you have to win. Coppin State seems like a game you have to win. New Mexico State, we talked about New Mexico State's program pretty much just imploded and was canceled last year. Bellarmine is a get back game that everybody's going to have their eyes on, that everybody's going to want to see Louisville, take that next step and beat Bellarmine. Whoa. And then, you travel to DePaul, which is an opportunity for a win against a team that has been a fringe NCAA tournament team the last few years. So, and then Arkansas State and Pepperdine, excuse me. So a bunch of winnable games, but in my opinion, I think you got to see at least 6 wins out of those games to even start considering the notion of, being a bubble team or contending against ACC teams. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to set the number at the minimum 7. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, if you can get 10 wins out of that, then you're feeling really good. And maybe a lot of people were wrong about Kenny Payne, and that is a possibility. But yeah, 7 wins, I think, is that minimum. You're playing 7 non-Power 5 teams. If you're Louisville, you win those games. Maybe you lose 1 and you only win 6, but then you can also very easily beat DePaul or Virginia Tech or someone like that. So yeah, 7 wins is my bar. If they exceed that or meet it, I'll have some optimism going into the conference schedule. But if they're under that, then it's going to be some tough nights watching the CW.
It will be. It'll be some tough nights getting the Gilmore Girl rerun previews. Absolutely. Getting into the actual talking about Louisville's roster side of things. And we'd previously recorded and we talked about what's going on with Ty-Laur Johnson, what's going on with a lot of stuff that changed as soon as we recorded it. So kind of an update to the Ty-Laur Johnson situation last week. And that was that he's eligible. He's going to be able to play this year, which I don't know. Did it come as a surprise to you?
I would say yes. I mean, he was committed to Memphis and then decommitted because it seemed like he was going to be ineligible. So to me, I thought that, well, Penny Hardaway let this extremely talented player go for a reason, most likely because he wanted a guy that was going to be eligible. So I figured the odds were kind of stacked against us. And, the fact that the NCAA just loves to deem every player ineligible, no matter how convincing their situation is. So yeah, completely shocked, but could not be more happy.
I'll take this in a little bit different of a direction. I was definitely surprised as well. And I think the way that we kind of had penned it in previous episodes, it felt like Johnson was not going to be eligible. Like, it just felt like the writing was on the wall. And even listening to the coaching staff, like listening to Kenny Payne, it sounds like they were a bit surprised. Like, they seemed optimistic, on the front end of things, but really it sounds like it took them by surprise a little bit that he actually was able to qualify. So you never really know what happens, but I'll kind of pin it in this direction, I guess. Louisville loses Trenton Flowers and then gains Ty-Laur Johnson. As of about 6 to 8 weeks ago, we thought that Trenton Flowers was going to be a starter on this team and that Ty-Laur Johnson would not be a part of this team. So now looking back at it, looking back at everything that happened in hindsight with Trenton Flowers, do you feel like this team is better because of this? About the same, or still like Trenton Flowers is kind of like a one and done type of talent, and you're going to be better because of that type of player, regardless?
I might be hot takey here, but I think if I had to choose one of the two players, Ty-Laur Johnson or Trenton Flowers, I would have chosen Ty-Laur Johnson. I think both are incredibly talented players. This is no knock on Trenton Flowers. This is more of, I think that Ty-Laur Johnson is everything that this team needed so desperately: a scorer, a ball handler, a playmaker, a point guard, and a guy that can help us not play Sky Clark for 36 and a half minutes a game. And yeah, Trenton Flowers is going to give us a scorer, but besides that, he wasn't giving us anything else. Not a great ball handler, not a great playmaker, not a point guard, and not a guy that could help take Sky Clark off the court. So to me, I think this team is a step ahead of where they would have been had we have had Trenton Flowers over Ty-Laur Johnson.
I would put it this way. I mean, I think overall, when you look at their body of work, I think that Trenton Flowers is a better player and will be a better player than Ty-Laur Johnson. However, when you look at needs and fit on this team, it feels like Ty-Laur Johnson is more of what this team needed. You had a lot of people, kind of a log jam, if you will, at Trenton Flowers' position. And I know that he said a lot about there's a lot to be said about him playing point guard or not playing point guard or being a guard in general. I mean, I do consider Trenton Flowers more of a guard, a slashing wing type of player. However, you need a guy, you need a second guy outside of Sky Clark, who, again, to emphasize as well, Sky Clark is not exactly the most proven player as a lead ball handler at the college level either. So you needed a second guy. And yeah, a lot of people are saying that could be Karan Davis, and maybe that pans out, but everything that you look at suggests that Karan Davis is more of a two guard, more of an off ball guard. And then after that, you get back into the same situation where it's basically Hersey Miller and Zan Payne behind Sky Clark. So situationally, it feels like this is a huge win for Louisville. And overall, this makes Louisville a better team as far as depth and as far as what you actually need for a team, if that makes sense. It'd be like putting together a football team, right? And having like 9 tight ends and only having one quarterback. It's great to have one quarterback, but what happens if you have to go to a walk-on after Jack Plummer, right? Like it's just it's comparable to that. It's kind of like when Scott Satterfield showed up on Louisville's campus to make another football comparison, and they had like 6 scholarship offensive linemen, but they had, I think, like 16 receivers. It was kind of a similar situation to that, and that's how it felt last year. Not that not that Ellis wasn't anything short of spectacular given the scenario, given the situation. It felt like Louisville was just needed that one more piece so that Ellis could just play 28 to 30 minutes, give full effort on defense, be an actual distributor, and be kind of a game changer. You got down to the end of games last year, and Ellis is just trying to do way too much. And, with last year's roster, you're looking at, you're down 7, 10, 12 points towards the end of every game. You have no shot at making a comeback if you have a point guard that's played every single second of the game. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, Ty-Laur Johnson is not necessarily going to be, I don't expect him to come in and shock the world and be some incredible player, but I think that he's a good enough piece and a good enough talent that, if you needed him to play 15 or 20 minutes, if Sky Clark or whoever gets in foul trouble or, God forbid, is injured or anything of that nature, when you need that piece, I think that Ty-Laur Johnson is a quality fit.
Yeah, I don't expect him to start. I think we've got Sky Clark and Mike James right there in the 1-2. So I think he's fine. He's going to come off the bench, but I think he gives us that reliable at least 10 minutes a game to probably start the year. And then as the year goes on, he gets more acclimated with the system and with the speed of college basketball. He could bump to 15, 20 minutes and maybe have Sky Clark and Ty-Laur Johnson on the floor at the same time, though that would be an undersized backcourt duo. But I mean, I just think he's a guy that sometimes you need a guy to come in and score 10 points off the bench, 15 points off the bench. He's going to have a game where we're like, holy crap, how do we win that game? It's because Ty-Laur Johnson came off the bench and scored 15 points on 8 shots and had 3 assists. And we're like, holy crap, thank God we called that guy.
Yep, I wouldn't doubt it in the least. I really wouldn't. And he is that prototypical New York City style point guard. Quick, off the dribble, finishes through contact. He's played at a pretty high level. So I think this is a guy that could surprise some people in a sense that he feels more college ready than most of the freshmen on Louisville's team. Caleb Glenn has a great frame, but still, needs to make the adjustments. He's only 1 year removed from playing at Male. And not to say that Louisville and Kentucky basketball in general is terrible, but it's not at all the level of where he went when he played for La Lu for a year. Curtis Williams is kind of just a question mark at this point. Dennis Evans obviously has some work to do to improve his overall game. So overall, coming into the season, I thought that if Trenton Flowers was the freshman that's going to play the most, that Ty-Laur Johnson would be second. So now with Flowers out the window, I absolutely think that Johnson's a guy that's going to get more clock than people anticipate, and he could make a tremendous impact. And playing with a guy like Sky Clark, who has a lot of similar skill sets, that could be super beneficial as well. And now you can start really playing with this roster and seeing, okay, well, we truly do have a 2 deep at every position. And then, even your 11th, 12th guys have potential to be okay, at least. So that's pretty promising to me. Again, I'm not expecting Ty-Laur Johnson to come in and just shock the world or anything like that. But I think that, having a guy that can be a supplemental piece, again, God forbid something happens to your starting point guard, you have to have somebody behind him. And I think that this is, considering all things considered, I think this is a great fit.
Yeah, I couldn't be happier. I think he's, in my opinion, the most impactful freshman we'll have on this team. I mean, I think guys like Dennis Evans and Caleb Glenn have a potential to be really, really great players for this team. Curtis Williams as well, especially with their frame. I mean, Ty-Laur Johnson, really the only thing that holds him back, it's not skill. It's the size. It's the fact that he's 6 foot and he's 160 pounds. Those are really the only fears I have. He's got those Russ Smith frenetic moments where you're like, oh my God, no, 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 no. Oh, thank God. And he just hits the shot. And then there's sometimes where he makes you pull your hair out and it's like, why throw the ball behind the back? Something like that. So he'll have his moments where he's good and he's bad, but skill is not an issue. I just think it'll be him kind of getting acclimated to that college basketball level and that speed. And hopefully him being able to put on a little bit of weight, because 160 pounds, he's going to be a mismatch on defense a lot of times at that size and that weight.
Yeah, I could see him maybe playing a little bit with Clark and situationally as like those microwave guys that can pick you up 3/4 or full court, something of that nature. If you're trailing towards the end of a game, if situationally, that could be a really cool duo to see in the backcourt together. And then I am interested in seeing improvement from Hersey Miller, a guy that he was really solid in stretches last year. I've always said, Hersey Miller just needs to be Elisha Justice. That's all Louisville needs him to be. And if he can continue that now, instead of being the secondary point guard, if he can be a guy that can just kind of come off the bench and be like an energy guy, like a spark plug type of situation, I'm not going to, just poo-poo the fact that Hersey Miller's on the squad as well. So when you add Ty-Laur Johnson, all of a sudden you kind of look at this roster from a much more positive framing. Now, can the coaching staff and the players take this and turn this into something, special? Can you go from a 4-win season to making the tournament? That definitely remains to be seen. I'm not going to, hold out hope for that necessarily. But I still think that should be the expectation that they're held to. And speaking of Kenny Payne, we had not heard much from Payne or the coaching staff in general. Today, you see Nolan Smith comes out talking with our guy Jeff Lightsey, which, by the way, if you don't follow Jeff Lightsey, one of the up and coming names for 35 KY Sports that has a show on Saturday mornings. But Jeff is doing becoming a lot more active on social media as well right now. So definitely a person to follow. Jeff had an interview with Nolan Smith, obviously addressed some of the rumors that Nolan Smith had interviewed for a G League job. Nolan did confirm that he had interviewed for a G League job. So thought that was interesting. And Kenny Payne got to talk about that a little bit. Nolan said that he for sure was not leaving. Do you buy into that, or why else would you interview for a job?
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. I'm just gonna choose to give him the benefit of the doubt. There's no point in doubting him. I mean, I guess there is some argument to be had that interviewing for a head coaching job and kind of getting that experience of the interview process and what GMs of G League teams and other college basketball teams are looking for when they're speaking to coaches. It helps him out, and it helps him out that teams are looking at him as a head coach. That also kind of gives him bigger buzz. So I think there are a couple of reasons why you would do it, but I feel like those reasons don't outweigh the potential negative of the fan base finding out that you're looking at other jobs. So I'm going to choose to believe Nolan here and hope that he's in it for the long haul. But it's definitely not the best look.
It's not the best look. I mean, I understand from Nolan's perspective, like if it's just straight up that Nolan's just looking for another job, I mean, who could really blame the guy? I mean, he played college basketball at Duke, won a national championship, played at the highest level as a guard for Duke, then goes on to be an assistant coach for the legend that is Coach K, and then pops over to Louisville, and Louisville has their worst season in school history. And not only that, it just seems like Kenny Payne does things his own way, which is fine, but you have to have coaches that are willing to kind of go along with that. Like, it feels like a Danny Manning is a guy who he had his head coaching gigs, he had his shot in the big time, and now he's kind of resided like a Bobby Petrino type to kind of just give it up and be that second man. Like, a lot of people are a great number two, and I think that's a great fit for him. However, when you look at a Nolan Smith is wanting to become a head coach. And who could blame him? He wants to get to the top of his profession. And when you are coaching alongside a coach like Kenny Payne, it feels like this is Kenny's chance, and he wants to do it the Kenny Payne way. And with that in mind, Nolan does not really have a chance to have a say in a lot of things that he did at Duke, at least from what I can kind of ascertain from the situation. And so just thinking about it from that reference point, not that there's anything, any beef between or any bad blood between Nolan Smith and Kenny Payne. It's more that, maybe sometimes that it makes total sense for Nolan to come to Louisville, but it doesn't make total sense for his connection with Kenny, right? Like, maybe there's, it's not all 100% clicking there. And I that's not, me, speaking out of the side of my mouth or just, speaking on rumors, more just speculating at, it doesn't feel like anything last year clicked. And so with that in mind, if I'm Nolan, I know the timing looks terrible, but as long as, he's given his coach a heads up and everybody's cool with it, I don't see necessarily an issue with him interviewing. However, the fact that it got out and the timing right after the Trenton Flowers stuff, it did look really bad. So it's nice to see, Nolan being able to come out and speak out about it. It's nice to see Kenny kind of having his back on the situation. And, I kind of agree with you. Give him the benefit of the doubt. And, it could just be something to have in the back of your mind. When we get to the middle of the season, we could always look back and be like, it's kind of like this, again, to draw another parallel, it's kind of like the Scott Satterfield thing, right? when he interviewed at South Carolina, a lot of people were super pissed, and it was coming off of a really bad year. And so at the time, I think a lot of us were just like, look, we can sit here and be upset about the Scott Satterfield thing, or we can support the team. Like, you can't really ride both lines. However, now we look back at the Scott Satterfield situation and say, wow, it's great that he's gone. It's great that everything worked out the way that it did. However, at the time, you kind of just had to make a decision either to move on, or some fans kind of sat on that and used that as a reason to, not be as supportive as they normally would have been. So I will choose to kind of just look at that as a guy trying to make it to the next level, trying to progress in his career, and, choose to be supportive about that. But there is good reason to speculate, what is going on with that, because you as a brand new head coach for the first time, you never want to bring in somebody who immediately is going to start looking to go elsewhere. And that could still be cause for concern. So that's kind of the way that I would frame that. And I would just leave it at that. Other stuff from the Kenny Payne press conference. What kind of stood out to you as Louisville's kind of preparing for the first Red-White Scrimmage on Wednesday, the 11th?
He said a lot. It's about a 30-minute presser on Monday. Talked a little bit about Ty-Laur Johnson, said he's already improved a ton in practice, and he actually highlighted his defense, which is something that when I watched his film was like his biggest con, was that he wasn't sound defensively. He liked to reach too much, and a lot of times he was just too aggressive, whether it was on ball or off ball, and got blown by a lot, gave up straight line drives, which was like the bane of my existence watching Louisville try to play defense last year, was giving up straight line drives. So that's good to hear that Ty-Laur's improving his defense. Called him a pest and challenges everyone. He talked about Brandon Huntley Hatfield, which I know he was talking about him a lot last year in the offseason as well. He came back again, said Hatfield needs to be an X factor. He said, quote, "We need Brandon to be really, really good. If he's really good, this team has a chance to be special." He says Hatfield got down to 8% body fat this summer, and they're focusing on his mental as much as they are the physical side of basketball. So I think that was interesting to hear that he feels that Huntley Hatfield is the X factor. I guess after watching the team last year, seeing what Huntley Hatfield is, I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, I think he does have potential to be a special player, but I definitely didn't look at that team and think, wow, that's the guy we need to become a tournament team or whatever it is. But maybe KP sees something that we haven't seen from him yet.
My biggest concern, if we're just singling out Brandon Huntley Hatfield, my biggest concern with him last year was defensively. It seemed like when he was truly fully healthy, it seemed like he was a real asset on the offensive end. He has the post moves. He's a capable outside shooter. He can score at most levels as an offensive player. The problem was last year, there's no real great fit for him in that scheme with the roster as it was constructed. And not only that, he was just so lost on defense. It was from the jump, it was greatly concerning. Just how, I'm not going to say incompetent. That sounds like such a negative connotation, but unprepared. He was just unprepared on defense. And in the little things that you're taught to do as a young player, those just never happen. It just never came to fruition on the defensive side of things. And then once he came back from injury, he was just never what he was for the 5 or 6 games before his injury. So from the Brandon Huntley Hatfield perspective of things, I think that there's so much potential there. I see him as the starter at the 5 spot right now. But it all comes down to defense for him. If he can actually be a defensive presence, then that's going to keep Dennis Evans off the court a lot more. If he can't get it together on defense, that's one of those things where I feel like the coaching staff could be trading offense for defense down the stretch of games. So that'll be something to watch for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon Huntley Hatfield, 2 years ago, class of 2021, was a consensus 4-star, and some had him highly ranked as highly ranked as a 5-star. So I mean, the kid has the potential to be amazing. He's really only going into a sophomore year. He just played a little bit with Tennessee in his very first year. So I mean, he does have the potential and the opportunity to really be the X factor that KP's talking about. Now, the other things that I noticed, he talked a little bit about last year's season. One of the big quotes was there were individuals on last year's teams that couldn't get past themselves to be about something bigger than themselves. So I don't know which players he was talking about. He didn't take any shots, and I wouldn't expect him to ever do that. He followed that up by saying some of them are here because of that, and some of them chose to leave. So it sounds like KP again emphasizing that basically last year he did not have a team that could compete talent wise or could compete when it came to their attitude, which is something he hinted at, but kind of really emphasized in this press conference a lot.
Do you feel that just listening to the tone of the press conference, do you feel that Kenny is seeing things in a much more positive light and being a little bit more candid about the team than he was last year?
Oh yeah, for sure. It feels like when he talks about last year's team, he's never going to call players out, but he is very clear that he did not have a bunch that was bought in to the team. They're bought in more to the self. And it seems like with this team, he talks about how they're all about the team and how they're working harder on the court in the what's the word I'm looking for? Oh yeah, in the I don't go to it very often, the gym. They like to work out, getting stronger, getting tougher. So it sounds to me like he sees a lot more positivity in the group of guys that he has compared to last year. And hopefully this isn't all just talk. Hopefully we actually see that on the court this year.
Yeah, man, it's so difficult for me to, like I don't want to get to a position again where, I'm trying to put lipstick on a pig, right? And off-season talk is just that. It's just off-season chatter. At this point, every year for the last 15 years, I've been incredibly invested in Louisville basketball. Just so amped up for the Red-White Scrimmage, ready for the preseason, ready for all of that. But until I see the product on the floor, I mean, that's all that matters. Like, I've never had an issue with Kenny Payne as a person or anybody on the coaching staff. I could accept the recruiting aspect of things if that's not why KP was brought to Louisville, right? Like, that was his signature thing, that he was just this outstanding recruiter everywhere that he was. Like, he was known as a guy that if KP's in the house and he wants a kid, he's going to get him. Like, that was 99 times out of 100. That's who Kenny Payne was. And now he's kind of come in and, and I apologize. The other thing, obviously, was that he was a great developer of bigs. That was the second kind of selling point. But he came in last year. Recruiting hasn't been hot either year. I think that the staff did a C- to C job of reconstructing this roster. I think that's a fair assessment. I don't think it was an F, but it definitely was not an A. And so when I look at this team and what Kenny Payne did last year and what we are looking forward to next year or this coming year, there's not a lot to hang your hat on. And so I don't want to get too hyped up about the way that he's talking about the team or the way that we're able to promote the team over social media or any of that. I mean, the reality is I just want to see what happens on the court before I get too excited. But with all that in mind, I will say there's definitely a different attitude and vibe around the program. I really like the kids' personalities that he's brought in. Like, they've done a really good job of just bringing in what seems like really good people. Like, from everything that I've experienced, Caleb Glenn is an A+ person with a great upbringing, great family, obviously a male high school kid. That's a huge bonus for him as well. And then, the Sky Clarks, Sky Clark has come in and immediately kind of taken over this team in a way that I don't think a lot of people expected. If you talk to Illinois fans or Kentucky fans or anybody else that was kind of burned by that situation, they're basically haters. They don't they don't like Sky Clark at all. So it's been positive news to see Sky Clark come in and kind of take over the way that he has. I really like some of the pieces that are left over from last year. Big Mike James guy, huge believer that Mike James could take a huge jump this coming year. Huge big D guy, phrasing, right? huge Big D guy coming in. I mean, who
Love
doesn't
Big
love
D.
Big D? So there's a lot of pieces on this team that you can be excited for. However, it's just going to be a wait and see thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, he can talk all he wants. I mean, no coach is ever going to be in the offseason being like, wow, the group of guys I have, they suck. The talent, not there. They're kind of all assholes. No coach is ever going to say that. So, of course, this is what we're going to hear. But I am glad to hear that he's being a little bit more open with the media, talking about the difficulties that he had last year. In his presser, he said he wants everyone to look at this team and say, wow, they play hard, they play together, they talk to each other. And he wants people to see that there is a different team chemistry. There's a competitive spirit about these guys, and the talent level has improved. He says it's a totally different team. So those are all the things I want to hear. Those are the things that we missed last year. We didn't see guys that really seemed like they cared. You saw that on defense a lot, and you even saw that on offense sometimes. You saw the chemistry wasn't there. You saw that a lot on offense. So I'm hoping that the words that he's saying now in this press conference turn in to victories when it comes to November, December, January, February. The only thing that kind of bothered me that he said, again, at the very end of that quote, he said, "This is the first step of many in rebuilding this program." And it's just like, no, it cannot be the first step of rebuilding. Last year should have been your first step. And now this year, you've got to show improvement. You've got to get at least 15 wins. I mean, there are too many good coaches out there flipping programs in one season, and this is too good of a program for us to be like, okay, this is the first year in rebuilding. Now we got 9 wins. Let's see if next year we can get 15. Like, I, that's the only thing that really stood out to me and just really bothered me from what he said.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it is pretty easy to kind of especially after last year, it's very easy to nitpick everything that's said, but it is true that is one part that kind of sounds like we're still having that attitude of last year. Like I want to, as a fan base, and as fans of those making the decisions about Kenny Payne and the staff, I still want the pressure to be on for this team to succeed. And don't get me wrong, I'm going to cheer for this team to succeed, and I hope that all of my suspicions and intuition about the situation, I hope all of that is completely wrong, and that we're able to get out there and really truly turn this thing around. I mean, there is a chance. Like I'm not going to downplay that either, but at the same time, yes, that does sound a lot like last year where it felt like there was too much of a long-term outlook on this program. Like we're looking at 5 years down the line before we think we're going to be good again, and that just doesn't cut it in this day and age. I could see in 1995 if the same situation happened and Kenny Payne took over, and that was the attitude. I could see that because at that time almost every player was playing 3-4 years. It was there was no transfer rules, there was no NIL, there was no way to just immediately turn a program around. That's not the attitude that you should have in 2023. In 2023, you can literally get rid of every player on your team and go out and use all of the resources that a Louisville has to essentially bankroll and kind of market and create a buzz around a team. Louisville is like the only program that I can think of, like Power Five program that is taking this sort of approach, right? And this is Louisville we're talking about. This is a top 10, top 7, 8 program in college basketball history. So I don't want to accept that because that's just not reality. And it makes me feel like we're behind the times a little bit. And I don't want to become, Indiana or UCLA before Mick Cronin, or, there's some of these programs that just have these lulls, and that's becoming Louisville. I mean, as we suggested already, it's been 6-7 years since there was anything relevant happening in Louisville aside from a 2-month stretch under Chris Mack, and then COVID hit and kind of shit hit the fan after that. But uh, I just don't want to be the program that accepts that and it's the little things like that. It's little throwaway things that you pick up on that it feels like that mindset's still kind of similar to last year, where it's like, all right, well, I don't want to set the expectations too high yet. But ultimately, in my opinion, I hope that we can set the expectations based on what we see on the floor, right? Like, if this team comes out the gate and goes 2-3, right there, we know what's going on with this program. If they come out the gate and go 6-0, then you can start talking about expectations. Then you can start talking about, okay, this is a team that I can actually beat some people. This is a team that can make the postseason. Until then, though, I mean, it's little stuff like that I don't want to get too hung up on it, but at the same time, I don't want to have that mentality at all as a fan.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, like you said, look at Jerome Tang. The man just got a huge extension, and for a reason. Because in 1 year, he turned K-State, who hasn't been relevant in 15 years, into an Elite Eight team. Like it can be done so quickly, and I agree. We cannot become Indiana. That is my biggest fear. The longer this happens, is that we become the program that was so used to being top 10, top 15 every single year, and then just slowly it starts to slip away. We have the David Paget years, we have the Chris Mack years, and we slowly become less and less ingrained in those winning traditions, and then eventually it just goes away. And you look around, and you're like, wait, what? We're not a blue blood anymore. And so I think that's my biggest fear, is that the longer this occurs, the longer this happens, the more we become the Hoosiers, which they look like they're going to have a good team this year. And I hope they do, because I like when the Blue Bloods are good. It makes college basketball more interesting. But just afraid that if we continue to say, oh, this is just the first step of many in a rebuilding program, that this program's is never going to become what it should be, and it's going to fall off and become something that should have never happened, and something that I would have never expected to happen in my lifetime. So he said some good things. I liked some of the things he said, especially about Ty-Laur Johnson and Brandon Huntley Hatfield. They give me some hope. And one other thing I wanted to touch on before we get off here, he talked about he's got a collective group of guys where there's not a big jump from one to the other when it comes to talent. They're all pretty good college players, and I think you talked about it earlier. That's something that's big. Last year, we had L. Ellis, and he was kind of very clearly cream of the crop of this team when it came to talent. But then after that, you were just kind of like, okay, who else can score the ball? And when L was playing poorly and when L was tired, he couldn't go to the bench and be like, Zan, get in there, give us your best 5 minutes, because unfortunately his best 5 minutes wouldn't cut it on a D3 basketball floor. And he talked about, with this year, if there's a guy not playing hard and they're not bringing it, he's going to come in and immediately sub in for another guy that has almost as much talent. So I think that is one really big thing that we didn't have last year, that overall well-rounded roster that hopefully we have this year, where, like you said, we're too deep at every position, where if some guy's not giving effort or if some guy's just having an off night, we have another option that we can go to, whether that is Hersey Miller, whether that is Ty-Laur Johnson or Caleb Glenn, Curtis Williams, whoever it is.
Yeah, and that shouldn't be overlooked either. There's so much to be said of having that kind of depth, because last year, I mean, it's got to be at least part of some of the issues was that there were 3 or 4 guys on that team that knew no matter what they did, there was nothing behind them. Like they had no other option but to play those guys. If they had 3 fouls in the first half, they were probably playing. If they turned the ball over 5 times and a half, they're probably playing. If they had a defensive lapse and they let a guy drive by them, or you're on the wrong guy, or you didn't box out correctly, or any of that kind of stuff, those little things, they add up over the course of a game. When you look at a high level college basketball game, it's 8 to 10 to 12 of those hustle plays that ultimately decide the game, and all of those plays went in the other team's favor almost every single game last season. So that's not something to kind of just like turn your nose at or not acknowledge either. And who knows, maybe that is a huge difference. And maybe it comes out that there were 2 or 3 guys on this team last year that were just complete cancers to the team. Like you truly don't know. And again, that's kind of why I want to see that on the floor as well. Looking forward to Wednesday, to the Red-White Scrimmage, what are you looking to see the most? Like, is there anything you can take away from these games where you can say, okay, well, that guy is a huge positive, or this is a huge asset for this team?
Yeah, I mean, red-white scrimmages is much fun and as exciting as they are to see. I don't really ever think I've watched it and been like, wow, that's a huge takeaway. But I mean, I think with this team, there is a little bit more to be interested in because there's so many new players. So, I mean, I'm excited to see Karan Davis. I'm excited to see Ty-Laur Johnson, Curtis Williams, Caleb Glenn, Dennis Evans, Danilo Jovanovic. I'm excited to see all these guys and see because I think it's kind of immediate. You can see, oh yeah, that guy's got it. He should be here. He belongs here. So I think in that aspect, there's just so many new faces that we can look at and can kind of understand like, oh, now I see why the staff brought them on, or we can be like, why in the world did we just add a JUCO player that wasn't ranked in the top 100? So I think that's going to be super interesting, just kind of seeing how that talent looks, and then also excited to see some of the guys that are coming back. Manny, he definitely didn't have the talent to be at the level he was last year, but I cannot deny that that's the most effort and hustle I've seen from a Louisville player in 5 years. So if the staff, if KP can be that big man whisperer that we believed he was when he had Anthony Davis and he had DeMarcus Cousins and he had Willie Cauley-Stein, then maybe there is something there with Manny. So excited to see that. JJ Trainer, of course, and then Brandon Huntley Hatfield. So just excited to see if the guys we had returning improve because they need to, and to see what these incoming players are and what that talent level is. And that'll kind of help me gauge my expectations for the season.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention this sets it up perfectly for me though. The person that I'm most excited to see, which is Trey White. I think that Trey White's probably the best player on this team. And from everything that you hear coming out of practice from people that are in the know, this is a guy that could absolutely be a first round draft pick this year. And he's going from a situation at USC where he was really the third guy to now he can be the man at Louisville. And he has everything that it takes to be a star 3-and-D type of player in the ACC. And all of a sudden, you look at this roster, and whether you see Trey White as a 2 or a 3, I think that he's a starter. And then you could have a Trey White. So you could have a Trey White, Mike James, Sky Clark roster in the backcourt, and all of a sudden that is much improved from a season ago. I think that a second-year Mike James could play off and feed off really well off of Trey White. I think that Mike James and Trey White in practice is probably a fascinating head-to-head matchup. It's two guys that are pretty polished offensively for their age and experience, and two guys that they're going to make each other better, having to defend each other every day. That's one of the main things that I want to see. The other thing I want to see is Karan Davis and Danilo Jovanovic, and apparently we're calling him D'Lo. That's what the coaches call him on social media. I want to see D'Lo and I want to see Karan Davis solely for the reasons of Louisville could have had Caleb Glenn in the offseason. Louisville could have had a number of very high-level, high-profile transfers, and they went with Karan Davis and Danilo Jovanovic. And again, it's nothing against those guys, but when you look at the types of players that Louisville has always expected to get, when you look at the types of players that we definitely expect Kenny Payne to get, that's neither of those guys are it. So it's going to be incredibly fascinating to watch and see, are these guys that can actually play on this level? Now, I will say D'Lo was recruited by Jim Larinaga at Miami. So I know that he at least has some sort of solid skill set. Like, this is a guy that's bringing in the best recruiting classes in the country, save Kansas and Kentucky right now. So that's one thing to consider, is that, maybe this coaching staff sees what the Miami coaching staff saw in him. And then, the other thing is, Karan Davis, again, coming in, he said in an interview at one point that he had offers from a few different Power 5 schools, but not at the level of what we expect Louisville to be. So is that a guy that's just going to be a supplemental piece? Is he a guy that we're expecting to kind of push other players on the roster, or is this going to be another Hersey Millers and Payne level player? Because Louisville has to have something better than that. If those two guys can pan out to be, like, if that's your 11th and 12th guy, the guys and they're pretty solid, like they're pushing the guys in front of them, then yeah, I'll have a lot more optimism towards the season. If they come in and it's just like, all right, what is this? Like, Seriously. Like, which that's my fear. That's my fear that that's what that's going to be, because then you're one injury away from, Karan Davis maybe being your starting two, or whatever the case might be. I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but you don't necessarily know how everything's going to shake out. And you want the guys that are going to be in the backup secondary positions to not be much of a fall off from the primary guys. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Any final thoughts or comments before we get out of here?
Nope. I'm excited to see it. I don't know if I'll be able to catch it live, but I'll definitely be going back and watching a full game recap somewhere on the internet. I mean, yeah, Mike James, Sky Clark, Trey White, all super, super excited about them. Those are kind of the guys that I'm expecting and counting on to be the catalyst of this team. So hoping to see them play at a level a little bit above the rest of the guys. Also just interested to see some of the matchups, hoping to see maybe Sky Clark versus Ty-Laur Johnson, hoping to see maybe a Mike James versus a Trey White. I think that would be fun, and kind of see how they compete. Or maybe have Sky Clark, Mike James, Trey White all on the same team, see how they gel. So I'll be interested to see how KP decides to match those guys up. But all in all, I think it'll be a bit of a more competitive red-white scrimmage, just due to the fact that we have a much more balanced roster. So I'm really pumped to watch it.
Dude, yep. I am not even saying this tongue in cheek. I'm excited to have basketball back. I'm excited to see you got 9 new guys. And no matter, how negative a lot of the conversations come off, it's 9 new players you get to check out, and just another chance to see how this staff and this team is assimilating. It's not quite the hype of football right now, but I am excited just to get back to, the grind of what is a college basketball season. So he's Jake Hook. You can follow him at U of L _updates on Twitter. Make sure you give him a follow. You can find me on Twitter at Press Meyer, but most importantly, at the State of Lou. Get us over 10,000 followers. We're real close on Twitter. And follow us at the State of Louisville on Instagram, as always. Until next time, starting 502 podcast. Let's get out of here.